What if I told you that one of the most powerful men in the world wants to buy an island that's literally frozen in time? An island so harsh, so unforgiving, that for thousands of years humanity barely survived there. But today it's the prize in a geopolitical game that could reshape the future of our world. Welcome to Greenland, a story about ice, empires, Vikings, nuclear weapons, and why Donald Trump thinks America should own it. Let's start with the fundamentals. What exactly is Greenland? Greenland is the largest island in the world. To put this in perspective, it's approximately 4 times smaller than Australia as a continent. We're talking about a truly massive piece of land in the far north. Here's the harsh reality: approximately 80% of Greenland is covered with a thick layer of ice. This means there are virtually no forests growing there, only some dwarf trees, mosses, and lichens. There is no agriculture whatsoever on this island. The only form of food production possible has historically been cattle breeding. The northern part of Greenland, known as the Land of Peary, presents a different kind of problem. While it has no ice cover, the air there is so dry that there is virtually no snow. Yet paradoxically, it's completely impossible for people to live there. In fact, people don't live there, they merely survive. In 2013, scientists discovered something extraordinary beneath Greenland's ice, the longest canyon on Earth. It was named the Great Canyon, in analogy with the American Grand Canyon. This discovery alone rewrote our understanding of Greenland's geography. Here are some other remarkable facts about this desolate corner of the world. Temperature records. It was in Greenland where the coldest air temperature ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere was registered. On December 22, 1991, the temperature plummeted to -69.6 degrees Celsius, that's approximately -93 degrees Fahrenheit. For comparison, the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth is in Antarctica, -89 degrees Celsius. Greenland comes dangerously close. The world's largest national park, Greenland hosts the Greenland National Park, the largest national park in the entire world. This park occupies an astonishing 972,000 square kilometers, more than half of Greenland's total area. The park exists in the northeastern portion of the island. Now, there's an interesting observation here: since Greenland's population is roughly 56,000 people, most of the island is essentially wilderness, making the concept of a national park almost comical in scale. Transportation challenge: transportation on Greenland is a unique problem. There are no railways on the island. There are also practically no inland roads. Historically, boats were the primary mode of transport in summer, while dog sleds were used in winter. Today, air transport dominates. There are 18 takeoff and landing strips in Greenland, with 14 having artificial surfaces. Car roads exist only within settlements, with a total length of just 150 kilometers across the entire island. This means cities are severely isolated from each other, making tourism and travel extraordinarily difficult. Now, the real story begins. How did Greenland become so important to the modern world? The answer lies in history. The prehistoric era, the first inhabitants of Greenland were the Paleo-Eskimo tribes, dating back to the 7th and 8th centuries BCE. Later came the Sakak, Independence I, Independence II, and Dorset cultures, all part of the Neo-Eskimo culture that eventually developed into the modern Inuit population. These ancient peoples left behind almost nothing except whale bones, primitive harpoons made from whale bone and sea urchin, and stone-tipped weapons. The Vikings arrive, Eric the Red, 877 AD. Around 877 AD, everything changed. The Vikings, those fearless Scandinavian sailors, began their legendary voyages of exploration across the world. If you haven't watched our documentary about Vikings, I highly recommend it. They truly shaped the course of human history. It was Eric the Red who is credited with the first European discovery of Greenland. Now, Eric's story is fascinating because it's filled with violence and ambition. Eric was born in southwestern Norway to a father named Torvald. Torvald was a man of violent nature who committed murder in Norway. As punishment, he was expelled from the country and sailed to Iceland with his family, where he settled. Erik grew up in Iceland, but he inherited his father's aggressive temperament. He quarreled constantly with his neighbors. According to the sagas, Erik's slaves were stolen, and when he went to settle the dispute, things escalated. He eventually killed 2 of his neighbors with an axe. In 981 AD, Iceland held a general assembly. Erik the Red was sentenced to expulsion from Iceland due to his restless character. Rather than accept exile to some backwater, Erik loaded his family and followers onto several ships and set sail, not toward the rumored lands of Vinland, modern-day North America, but somewhere else entirely. The discovery: for 3 years, Erik the Red explored the lands to the west. What he found astonished him: a massive island with abundant wildlife, white bears, reindeer, walruses, and seal. The walruses particularly excited him because their ivory was extremely valuable in medieval Europe, a luxury item that normally required long trade routes from distant lands. Erik established a settlement and did something brilliant. He named this frozen wasteland Greenland, even though it was almost entirely covered in ice. According to historical accounts, he did this specifically to attract settlers. The reasoning was simple: an island called Greenland would sound far more appealing than Iceland. Whether or not this was a marketing trick, it worked. Vikings began migrating to Greenland, establishing 2 main settlements on the island's western coast. The Christian era. By the 11th century, Christianity reached Greenland. According to legend, Erik the Red's descendants visited King Olaf I of Norway, who convinced them to convert from their Norse pagan gods, Thor, Loki, and the rest, to Christianity. The first Christian church in Greenland was established at Brattle, Erik the Red's estate. The ruins of this church still exist in Greenland today, standing as a testament to the Viking settlement. Erik's son, Leif Erikson, became a renowned explorer in his own right. He sailed west and reached Vinland, the territory of modern-day Canada or North America. Leif is believed to have been an early Christian missionary, spreading Christianity to the indigenous populations and establishing a bishop seat in Greenland. The Viking trade system. Throughout the 13th century, a Viking community flourished in Greenland. They exported valuable goods to mainland Europe: walrus ivory, seal skins, whale fat, whale skin, and flounder. They were among the world's first significant walrus hunters. In return, they imported essential goods that couldn't be produced in Greenland's harsh climate, primarily wood for construction. By 1261, the Viking settlements in Greenland swore allegiance to the King of Norway, agreeing to pay taxes in exchange for royal protection and guaranteed trade access. It seemed a stable arrangement. But history had other plans. The decline and disappearance. In 1380, Norway entered into a personal union with Denmark. By extension, Greenland, which was a Norwegian possession, came under Danish control. This marked the beginning of what Greenlanders would later call colonization by Denmark. But something far more sinister was happening: the Vikings of Greenland were vanishing. The 14th century brought the Little Ice Age, a period of sharp climate change. Temperatures dropped dramatically, making agriculture impossible and causing widespread starvation. Simultaneously, the Great European Plague reached Greenland, brought by merchants. This plague killed approximately 50% of Greenland's population. At its height, Greenland's Viking population numbered between 3,000 to 5,000 people, at most 7,000 to 10,000 in the best years. This small, isolated population was devastated by disease and climate change. Inbreeding became inevitable. The constant attacks by the indigenous Inuit population added another layer of pressure. By the beginning of the 15th century, all traces of the Greenlandic Vikings had disappeared. The last written record of the Norse Greenlanders dates to 1408, a marriage record from the same church on Erik the Red's estate. After that, silence. It remains one of history's great mysteries: did they die? Did they flee back to Europe? Did they intermix with the Inuit population? We may never know. After the Vikings vanished, Greenland fell into obscurity for centuries. The Danes, who had inherited Greenland through their union with Norway, showed little interest in developing the island. Many Danes didn't even believe Greenland truly existed. They thought it was a mythical place called Friesland, similar to the legendary city of Kitezh in Russian folklore. Rediscovery, 1600s. In 1605, the Danes began serious exploration of Greenland. It wasn't until the 17th century that Denmark officially began colonizing the island. Between 1652 and 1654, King Frederick III of Denmark launched 3 expeditions to Greenland. These expeditions confirmed that the island did indeed exist and began the systematic Danish colonization process. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the primary business of Greenland was whaling. Whale fat, whale skin, and whale meat were exported throughout Europe, making Greenland a valuable economic asset for Denmark. The enlightened colonial period, 1800s. Remarkably, the Danish rule over Greenland became relatively progressive for its time. In 1851, while serfdom was being abolished in Russia and London was still debating railway expansion, Greenland published its first newspaper in the Greenlandic language, a remarkable achievement for a remote Arctic colony. By 1860, local democratic elections were organized in Greenland, giving the Inuit population a voice in local governance. However, all major political decisions remained firmly in Copenhagen. Greenland depended entirely on Danish subsidies, Danish trade, and Danish supplies. In the 1860s, something extraordinary happened. The United States made its first offer to buy Greenland from Denmark. This wasn't random. After American independence, the United States had been aggressively expanding its territory. Some lands were conquered in wars, like territories taken from Spain, some were acquired through wars with Native American tribes, which eventually became states, and some were simply purchased. The Louisiana Purchase is a perfect example. The Americans didn't just buy the state of Louisiana, they bought an enormous tract of land in the middle of America, fundamentally expanding the nation's size and influence. The Americans also purchased New Mexico and attempted to buy Canadian territories. This was the era of American manifest destiny. In 1867, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward made an official proposal to Congress: let's buy Greenland and Alaska from Denmark and Russia respectively. Congress rejected the Greenland proposal outright. What was the point of buying a frozen wasteland? However, they approved the purchase of Alaska from the Russian Empire, a decision that seemed foolish at the time. How did that work out? Well, decades later, they discovered gold in Alaska, then oil, then natural gas. Alaska became one of America's most valuable possessions. Secretary Seward's foolish purchase eventually proved to be one of the greatest real estate deals in American history. But the Danes refused to sell Greenland in 1867. And for decades, the matter was forgotten. Everything changed with World War II. When Nazi Germany invaded Denmark in 1940, the Danish military offered only minimal resistance. The occupation lasted approximately 6 hours. Denmark quickly capitulated. The Americans immediately understood the implications. If Germany occupied Greenland, they could establish military bases there, refuel submarines, and potentially control the entire Atlantic Ocean. This would allow them to sever all trade routes between Great Britain and the United States. On April 8, 1941, the United States unilaterally occupied Greenland, ostensibly to prevent German occupation. An agreement with Great Britain allowed the Americans to establish a naval and air base on the island. Post-war, the second attempt, 1946. When World War II ended in 1945, the Americans had invested heavily in infrastructure in Greenland, military bases, airfields, naval facilities. In 1946, the United States offered Denmark $100 million for Greenland, a substantial sum at the time. The reasoning was straightforward: we're already here. We've already built extensive military infrastructure. Why not just sell us the island? The Danes refused. However, the Americans didn't leave. In fact, they never left. Denmark became a founding member of NATO, and Greenland's strategic importance made it one of NATO's most valuable assets. The Americans and Danes developed a mutually beneficial relationship. Denmark allowed American military presence in Greenland, and in exchange, Greenland received substantial American military investment and economic support. As tensions escalated into the Cold War, Greenland became even more critical. It was a strategic outpost directly in the path of any Soviet bombers or missiles heading toward North America. The Cold War brought two extraordinary, and troubling, chapters to Greenland's history. Project Iceworm, 1950s-1967. In the 1950s, the U.S. military conceived an audacious plan to build a secret nuclear base buried deep beneath Greenland's ice sheet. The logic was brilliant from a military standpoint. Greenland's ice sheet is incredibly thick and extends across a vast area. What better place to hide nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles than beneath 1,000+ meters of ice? The plan, codenamed Project Iceworm, involved digging 20 tunnels with a total length of 3+ kilometers. Constructing underground facilities housing up to 600 nuclear missile launch sites. Installing a mini-nuclear reactor to power the facility. Building underground living quarters, work areas, and even a church. Creating an area of 84,000 square kilometers, making detection nearly impossible. The Danish government was told this was a research station to study glaciology and climate science. The Americans promised to share all research findings. In reality, they were digging a massive secret military installation. The problem, during construction, scientists discovered that Greenland's ice sheet was far more unstable than previously believed. Ice layers moved and deformed much faster than anticipated. Within just 2 to 3 years, the carefully constructed tunnels were being destroyed by ice movement and deformation. In 1962, the reactor room's ceiling cracked under the pressure of the ice above it. The reactor had to be emergency reinforced to prevent catastrophic collapse. In 1967, Project Iceworm was abandoned. The environmental disaster, the Americans intended to quietly abandon the facility, leaving radioactive and toxic waste beneath the ice to be slowly consumed and hidden by glacier movement. But as climate change accelerated in recent decades, the ice began melting, exposing the facility's remains, barrels of feces, radioactive waste, and other toxic materials that now threaten to contaminate Greenland's ecosystem. The lost nuclear bomb. In parallel with Project Iceworm, the U.S. Air Force operated Operation Chrome Dome, a continuous airborne nuclear deterrent program. The concept was straightforward but terrifying. B-52 strategic bombers, each carrying real nuclear weapons, patrolled constantly in the air. If the Soviet Union launched a first strike, these aircraft could immediately retaliate, ensuring mutual assured destruction and thus preventing war. One patrol route flew over Greenland and the Arctic. Every day, B-52s with nuclear payloads flew predetermined routes, from New York toward the Soviet Union and back, refueling in the air from tanker aircraft. January 21, 1968, a B-52 took off for combat duty over Greenland. The crew included 4 nuclear weapons officers. During the flight, a crew member, reportedly uncomfortable and cold, placed foam pillows against a ventilation grate to create a cushion. The pillows blocked airflow, causing the cabin to cool dangerously. Someone opened an air valve to restore circulation. A spark ignited the pillows. Fire erupted. The crew attempted to extinguish it with a fire extinguisher, but the flames spread, and toxic smoke filled the cabin. The captain ordered an evacuation. One pilot died during ejection. The other 3 crew members parachuted to safety. But the B-52, still carrying 4 thermonuclear hydrogen bombs, continued flying on autopilot over Greenland. Without a crew to control it, the aircraft eventually crashed near the American military base at Thule. The crisis, this presented 2 catastrophic problems. 1, 4 thermonuclear weapons were unaccounted for. No one knew if they had been destroyed in the crash, partially detonated, buried in the ice, or survived intact. 2, Denmark had explicitly forbidden nuclear weapons in Greenland. The US-Danish agreement stated that Greenland could host NATO forces and conventional military equipment, but absolutely no nuclear weapons. The Americans had violated this agreement flagrantly. The secret operation, the Americans immediately launched Operation Dr. Friesland, a secret recovery operation using bulldozers and manual labor in Arctic conditions. Workers removed approximately 5 centimeters of contaminated ice, placed it in containers, and transported it to the United States. The surrounding area was completely sterilized. The operation continued until the Arctic summer made conditions somewhat more manageable. The results: the Americans officially claimed to have recovered 3 bombs. The 4th bomb, they suggested, had partially detonated on impact, and only its radioactive core remained in the ocean among wreckage. The reality: in truth, no one knows exactly what happened to the 4th bomb. It may still lie on the bottom of the Arctic Ocean near Greenland. It may have been contaminated with radiation. It may pose an environmental threat that hasn't yet materialized. This incident remained secret until 1995, 27 years later, when newly declassified documents were revealed to the public. The BBC investigated and exposed the full truth of what had happened. The end of Chrome Dome: following this disaster, Operation Chrome Dome was terminated. No more American B-52 bombers carrying live nuclear weapons patrolled the skies over Greenland or Europe. The Cold War is long over. Soviet Union is gone. So why does Greenland matter now? Why would Trump want to buy it? The answer lies in 2 critical geopolitical factors. Factor 1: rare earth metals. Beneath Greenland's ice lies one of the world's largest deposits of rare earth metals, critical materials needed for modern technology. Phone and computer displays. Solar panels and renewable energy systems. Electric vehicle batteries, lithium, cobalt. Advanced electronics and defense systems. 20 to 30 years ago, extracting these metals from beneath the ice was economically impossible. But climate change is rapidly melting Greenland's ice sheet. Within 10 to 20 years, mining these rare earth metals will become economically viable, and possibly necessary. The Chinese understood this immediately. Chinese companies are already moving into Greenland, offering to rebuild abandoned airfields, build infrastructure, and in exchange, gaining concessions to mine rare earth metals. The Americans are alarmed. If China gains control of Greenland's rare earth metals, China essentially controls the supply chain for all modern technology. The global balance of power would shift dramatically. Factor 2: the Arctic resource race. The Arctic contains an estimated 15% to 35% of all undiscovered reserves of oil and gas in the world, potentially trillions of dollars worth. Beyond hydrocarbons, the Arctic seafloor contains rare earth metals: gold, nickel, lithium. Essentially half of the periodic table. Arctic Council member states, Russia, Canada, Norway, Denmark, the United States, and others, are engaged in a competition to claim as much of the Arctic continental shelf as possible. International law allows countries to claim resources within 200 kilometers of their coast. But continental shelf claims are more complex. Countries can argue that underwater geological formations are extensions of their continental landmass, extending their claim far beyond the standard 200-kilometer limit. Russia claims vast Arctic continental shelf. So do Canada and the United States. Each nation argues that geological evidence supports their claim to resources far beneath Arctic waters. Greenland is strategically located at the intersection of all these claims. It's a gateway to Arctic resources. Whoever controls Greenland has influence over Arctic mineral extraction, Arctic shipping routes, as polar ice melts, and Arctic geopolitics. There's another critical factor: Greenland's own political evolution. Greenland is technically part of Denmark, but it enjoys broad autonomy. It has its own government, its own political parties, and a growing movement toward complete independence. The reason is straightforward: Greenland is economically subsidized by Denmark. 60 to 70% of Greenland's budget comes from Danish funding, but Greenland possesses the valuable resources. Why shouldn't Greenland keep the wealth generated by its own resources? Political parties in Greenland openly campaign for independence from Denmark and self-determination over Greenland's resources. Furthermore, a historical scandal has inflamed anti-Danish sentiment. The forced sterilization program, 1960s to 1970s. During the 1960s and 1970s, when Greenland's Inuit population was growing, the Danish government implemented a program of forced sterilization. Doctors from mainland Denmark were sent to examine Greenlandic women in covertly inserted intrauterine devices, IUDs, without consent or knowledge. Many women didn't discover they had been sterilized until they attempted to have children years later. An entire generation of Inuit women had their reproductive capacity stolen by a colonial power. This scandal has resulted in massive lawsuits against Denmark. Many of these women are now 70 to 80 years old. The historical trauma remains fresh and deeply felt. This context is crucial. Many Greenlanders view Denmark as a colonial oppressor, not a beneficial partner. When American investment and autonomy are offered as alternatives, Greenland's population is far more receptive than Denmark prefers. In 2019, during his first term as president, Donald Trump publicly proposed purchasing Greenland from Denmark. The proposal was mocked internationally as absurd. Greenland isn't for sale. Denmark is a NATO ally. What could Trump possibly be thinking? In 2025, during his second term, Trump renewed the proposal, only this time, the geopolitical context made the proposal far more serious. Trump understands what many don't: this isn't about buying a frozen island. This is about controlling the future of Arctic resources and preventing China from gaining a foothold in Greenland. Trump's perspective. If Denmark won't sell, and if Greenland moves toward independence, which many predict within a decade or two, then Greenland will negotiate with the highest bidder. That bidder could be 1. The United States, offering investment, security, technology, and economic development. 2. China, offering infrastructure, rare earth mining concessions, and Arctic access. 3. Russia, offering Arctic alliance partnerships. Trump is essentially saying, the era of Greenland belonging to Denmark is ending. The question is, who will Greenland align with next? By publicly expressing American interest, Trump is signaling to Greenland's political leadership, choose us, and we'll make it worth your while. As of late January 2026, the international response has been revealing. France and Europe. French MEP Nathalie Loiseau stated that sending EU troops to Greenland would demonstrate Europe's commitment to protecting the island from American acquisition. Austria's EU Defense Committee Chair, General Robert Brigger, openly discussed deploying EU military forces to Greenland to counter American interest. This represents a potential NATO fracture. If America and Europe go to war over Greenland, NATO fundamentally collapses. The United Kingdom. There's an obscure 19th/early 20th century agreement between the UK and Denmark, and possibly the US, that gives Britain some say over Greenlandic territorial claims. This agreement is so forgotten that even modern diplomats aren't sure what it actually says. The symbolism. Denmark's coat of arms features a white polar bear, a symbol of Denmark's control over Greenland. The question now is, how long will that bear remain in the Danish coat of arms? When you hear, Trump wants to buy Greenland, and dismiss it as foolish, remember, there are no fools in this game. This game is worth trillions of dollars. The Arctic is the next frontier. Oil, gas, rare earth metals, shipping routes, geopolitical dominance, all hang in the balance. Greenland sits at the crossroads of all these interests. Trump isn't the only one thinking strategically about Greenland. China is moving aggressively. Russia is making Arctic claims. The European Union is now mobilizing military forces. Canada is asserting Arctic sovereignty. The world is engaged in a battle for the Arctic. Greenland is the opening move. And Greenland's indigenous Inuit population, after centuries of colonialism, oppression, and exploitation, now finds itself in a unique position of power. They can negotiate with multiple global superpowers and demand the best possible deal for their island, their resources, and their future.